Reading poetry is awesome.
Writing poetry is awesomer. Stick around to find out more about how to read poetry
And how to take your poetry writing from meh to magnificent. Martin Carter is probably the most famous poet from Guyana. He was a founder of a political party and even went to jail for his politics. It's not surprising that his poetry is known for themes of protest and revolution.
This is the dark time, my love. It is the season of oppression, dark metal, and tears.
You can hear the poet's almost musical use of language and also his concern with politics. He uses repetition a lot and he pays a lot of attention to the landscape and nature because Guyana. Martin Carter's first book, Poems of Resistance from British Guiana, was published in London in 1954. He died in 1997 and is buried in Guyana's Place of Heroes.
It is the man of death, my love. The strange invader watching you sleep and aiming at your dream.
Humans love poetry. No, really. We were making poems before we wrote anything down at all. Rhythm, rhyme, and repetition all help make things easy to remember and easy to pass on to somebody else. Which is probably why there's been poetry all over the world, in all languages, throughout human history. But if you ask, what makes a poem a poem? That's a hard one. Each part of the world has its own ideas about how to shape a poem, but mostly, a poem looks like a poem and sounds like a poem. That is, most poetry is written in lines, and its language isn't the same as our ordinary speech. What's a line? The arrangement of the words of a poem on the page is usually in lines. These lines can be individual or grouped into a stanza. A poet may break a single sentence into several lines. Short lines or one-word lines sometimes give a sense of urgency or abruptness, while a longer line may not. Shorter lines also may indicate isolation or silence because of the white space on the page. In An African Thunderstorm by David Rubadiri, the writer uses plenty of short lines in the first part of the poem, giving a sense of danger and anticipation as the storm blows in.
From the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind, turning sharply, here and there, like a plague of locusts, whirling.
So the next time you write a short line, ask yourself, what's the effect of this line? Is it the effect I intend, or would a longer line be better here? And now, back to our regular programming. The Western world's poetry traditions go back to early religious poems and songs, evolving to epic poems like the Iliad and Beowulf. Big bloody stories about heroes and kings and battles.
Since erst he lay, friendless a foundling, fate repaid him, for he waxed under welkin, in wealth he throve.
Remember, what is considered good poetry changes over time. Don't write like this now. Western poetry evolved a lot in the early 20th century. Formal poems have moved over to make room for poetry that was closer to the sound of regular speech and about more everyday topics. Caribbean poetry is published in books, spoken on stage, and sometimes set to music like reggae, calypso, and rapso.
I am living while I'm living, to the Father I will pray. Only Him know how we get through every day.
Early Caribbean poetry was very European in style and tone. By the early 20th century, Caribbean poets were experimenting with a new kind of poetry that drew on African, indigenous, and Asian traditions. In the early 1900s, Cuba's Nicolas Guillen mixed things up, writing poems that spoke to the sun music he heard on the streets. His poetry wasn't African, it wasn't European, it was Caribbean. Anglophone Caribbean poetry exploded in the middle of the 20th century, partly because of a BBC World Service radio show called Caribbean Voices. It was like a lit blog, and all the coolest writers were invited to contribute. Popular themes in Caribbean poetry include exile and belonging, life after colonialism, and the relationship between the region and the ancestral lands of our people. Women's lives are also a hugely important topic. Write a poem that uses rhyme, rhythm, and repetition to make a complex idea more memorable. It can be on any topic and in any style. Try it!